Welcome to the Elevate podcast, brought to you by the Registered Master Builders. Each week we explore the ideas and practices that help us get the best from our businesses, our teams and ourselves. I'm your host, Ryan Castle. We talk to experts, advocates and business owners in the construction industry to share their knowledge, insights and experiences to help you build a better business and enjoy a better life. Now let the business building begin. Today on the Elevate Master Builders podcast, I am joined by Darrell Trigg, owner of Trigg Construction, along with his wife, Marlene. Today, we talk about possibly the most complex build ever in the history of New Zealand. Imagine a building that has no two things the same, not a single window the same, not a balustrade the same, not even a tile the same. And one of the underlying philosophies is everywhere you look, it must look different. This is an amazing journey that took 30 years from concept to build, and what's been achieved by the Trigg Construction team and the community of Whangarei is truly exceptional. You are in for a treat. Darrell, welcome along to the Elevate Master Builders podcast. You are a former guest and we've got you back again, but we've got you on a whole different topic today. Welcome along.
Yeah, thanks very much, mate. It's a real pleasure to be part of it again.
Oh, it is, and we'd like to say thank you for the contribution you've made to the Master Builders community right across the board. And I think in today's conversation, Darrell, you'll be able to share a lot of good insights for our members. You've been involved in a stellar project in the far north of New Zealand, up in Whangarei, and the Hundertwasser Art Centre. Wow, this has been a project that has been really significant for the community, and we'll talk a bit about that. But I understand it took about 30 years from conception to you putting some footings down. Is that right?
Yeah, look, it's one of these projects that's just been absolutely polarising for the community. I think not so, supposedly because it's art, and art is there to create a conversation, and this certainly has done that. The then Mayor Stan Seminoff 30 years ago invited Hundertwasser, who's living in the Bay of Islands. So Hundertwasser is a Austrian artist. Some people think he's an architect, but he's an artist and based out of Vienna, and he's just a rock star in right throughout Europe. His MO, I suppose, from an architect point of view, or from a building point of view, is he was all about nature and being in tune with nature. So all his paintings and all that, for example, he would paint a painting and then he'd take it out the back of his property in the Bay of Islands and sit it in a tree and just sit back and watch it for an hours to see if it was in harmony. And if it wasn't, he'd scrap it or he'd keep it and produce it. So, put it out there. So it's very much everything was in tune with nature and the rawness and the uniqueness and the randomness of nature. And that comes through in his buildings. So, he believed that why should buildings be square and true and straight and level and plumb and all the rest of it like they are, like modern architecture is, when nature's not like that. Yeah. How dare we?
It's like that because they're easier to build, aren't they, Darrell?
Damn right. It's a little bit too predictable, but certainly building this was something that was so far removed from anybody's trade skills or whatever that you've built up over the years. So it was a great project.
So take us on a bit of a timeline. 30 years ago, the Mayor, Stan Seminoff, was that correct?
Correct, yes.
Yep. So tell us how we got from Stan into the involvement with Hundertwasser, how it got concepted, and then maybe a bit of a journey through those 30 years to how we got to Trigg being the principal build partner on it.
30 years ago, the then Mayor Stan Seminoff invited Hundertwasser to come and choose a building in Whangarei to what you'd call repurpose, to Hundertwasser it. And that was the whole thing. So he'd take buildings that he called architecturally handicapped and breathe new life into them. And so he chose a building down at the Whangarei Town Basin and drew essentially a sketch on the back of a napkin. And from there, I think it was so polarising that it ebbed and flowed to points where there was a binding public referendum. There was half the people loved it and half the people absolutely hated it with a vengeance. There was death threats to people that supported it. It was just absolutely polarising.
Crazy.
And because it's art, right? But essentially where it really started to gather some momentum was in the later years. The The project it had stalled. There was a binding referendum which gave it the go-ahead from the council, because a lot of the councillors didn't want a part of it either because it was so polarising and they'd get voted out. There was a binding referendum, then there was a dedicated bunch of local business people that got together and essentially raised $27 million in 2 years in Whangarei.
Amazing.
So a mixture of anything from sausage sizzles to philanthropists like Sir Michael Hill, lots of people got involved with it, that they could see the benefit of it. Government funding from successive governments, so from both National and Labor has supported it, and they got across the mark and the project got going. Unfortunately for the project, just with that building, so it was a building right down in the town basin area of Whangarei, with the new earthquake code and new engineering standards and all that, that building couldn't be left behind and used. But in the true intent of Hundertwasser's vision about repurposing a building, it's probably about 90% of it was recycled and reused in the new building.
Right. Amazing. And Darrell, give us a bit of context for Trigg Construction for those of you or the listeners that don't know you. Can you just tell us a little bit about your organisation, what you're focused on, what are some of your key philosophies, and then maybe bring us together how that melded together with the Hundertwasser project?
So Trigg Construction, we're a family company. My wife Marlene and I started it. A typical story about the young builder who did his apprenticeship and went out and started building houses and doing all sorts of things, and people started like what we were doing, and we just got a few more people to help us out and grew. We changed focus a little bit a few years back into commercial, into solely focusing on commercial, because we felt there was a bit of a gap there in Whangarei and sort of lower Northland, and really repurposed our business to gear it towards commercial with people, branding, expertise, systems, all of that stuff, with actually a express target of getting this job as well. That was one of our key points. And a key point wasn't just to get it. It was actually to demonstrate that there is capability to do these complex projects in the regions. You don't have to drag the tier one builders in all the time. And just on that, we put about 900 people through that site to work, and probably 95% of them were from Northland.
Fantastic.
So we're incredibly proud of that.
Yeah, you should be.
Yeah, and so from Trigg's point of view, we've been involved as an avid supporter of it for years, just because whether you like the art or not, the concept of having a globally iconic building in your wee town is just a life changer. It's a game changer. So based on that, I like the art. I think it's great. I think it's bold. It's colourful. It's an experience. That's what we set out to get. Time and time again, I get people saying to me, we just had an amazing time there. And that's not even just looking at the amazing art in the building.
And Darrell, we'll talk about the building itself shortly. I'm curious, how did you go about securing the contract? It is a large scale build. There's a lot of money involved. I'm sure the tier one builders were interested in also having it in their portfolio to say, hey, we've also built this. What do you think was key for Trigg in winning the business?
It was a tendered project, but there was a big portion of it which was provisional summed out. And for those who don't understand provisional sum, it's a amount of money that's set aside to complete certain aspects of a project in its entirety. And so that was all the difficult stuff like the golden cupola, the plastering, the tiling, a lot of the wet trades, so some of the real tricky stuff, which was essentially the art, which is really hard to quantify. And then the rest of it, the client-side team provided a schedule of quantities. The big focus for us on all of our work is innovation. So we set out to outsmart everyone else. But we had a big mantra in our project team was to procure local as much as we can. And as I said, the only two contractors we had were Schindler Lifts from Germany and Brian Perry, who did the piling. Other than that, every other contractor was from Northland. So that was a key point in our tender. And then a whole lot of other smarts around entry and exit to the site and all sorts of things that we just did that were a lot cleverer, that saved the client money on the facilities. We had really, really good facilities, which we supplied. We actually built ourselves and Trigg own, but we charged a small amount to the client, which ended up being about 25% of what it would cost to hire them for the whole project. So things like that. So at every step we tried to innovate and just be smarter than whoever else was tendering.
Fantastic, Darrell. And I know you always come with the philosophy of having everybody involved in a construction project as winners, rather than what we often see as very competitive, client-led construction company sub-trades all kind of battling, and it end up being a less than desirable relationship environment. I know you bring that philosophy to the table in every project you work in. On reflection, do you feel like you achieved wins with, the core client with your business and with your sub-trades?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I mean, in no uncertain terms, it wasn't a simple job, but, I think firstly, contractually, you've got to make it simple. Well, no, not onerous, put it that way. The terms and conditions between client and contractor to a certain extent waterfall down, but contractually, if you make it palatable for the subcontractors, that side of it, they'd be happy. And then on site, sometimes construction can be a bit tough going. But we had fantastic facilities. We had a big canteen. We had really, really good facilities right throughout the whole site that the guys, when the going was a bit tough, they had a place, a bit of a sort of oasis to retreat to. We set about creating a really good culture. We got a big old steel barbecue made up, and every time we had a milestone like foundations done, floor down, whatever, we'd put on a site-wide barbecue. Every time it was someone's birthday, we put on a site-wide barbecue, just things like that.
Darrell, with 900 people on site at various stages, there must have been like 3 barbecues a day.
Yeah. It was it got pretty good. The guys had a pretty good relationship with the Pack and Save team across the road, that's for sure.
I bet.
A few times I'd have a chat to the whole team, the wider site team, and just say, look, you guys have got to understand that there's everyone around the world is wanting to be inside this fence, and we're the only ones privileged enough to be here. And it sort of put it into check sometimes where everyone stopped and thought, well, actually, that's probably right, This
Totally.
is a pretty cool thing to be part of.
Yeah, and potentially a once-in-a-lifetime project involvement for many people. You may not ever get a chance to do another building of that kind of scale and uniqueness.
It was Hundertwasser's last design that he personally designed, so it's a one-off in that respect. But the cost per square metre of this thing, we spent 3.5 years building a 2-story building, so we're either really slow or it's really complex, so there will never ever be another opportunity like this because it was so cost heavy, but it just had to be like that to be an original.
In the show notes for the podcast, we'll put some links so people can go and have a look, and of course encourage people to go and visit regardless of where you are in the country. I think as anyone involved in construction, you'd be able to have a deep appreciation for just how complex this project was, but also what an amazing outcome's been achieved. So Darrell, let's turn our attention to the building itself. Hundertwasser, one of his posters says, "You are a guest of nature, behave." I love that as a sentiment. Can you talk to us about how, from a construction perspective and maybe the design of the building, how does it go about encompassing that nature aspect?
He has a lot of rules, the Hundertwasser Code, by which his buildings are adhered to. One of them is the building follows the hands of its creators. So when you get to applying the art, like the tiles and all the rest of it, that's up to the tiler and the bricklayers and all that. They can't create a repetitive pattern, an image, or make it look man-made or symmetrical, because that's not how nature is. If you pick, say, 2 tōtara trees, if you're walking through the bush, you have a look at them, they won't be identical. So the branches won't be at 1 metre centres and the trunks won't be 200 diameter all the way. They'll look similar, but they're not identical. So that whole building has to be like that. So one of his code or rules is if you're in a place or in a space, like this room, that room, the next room outside, you can't look around and see the same thing twice. So that means that no 2 windows are the same, no 2 doors are the same, no 2 door handles are the same. So apart from sprinkler heads and all that, any compliance stuff, the form and fabric of the building is totally bespoke. So every day you get up, you're not doing something that you've done before virtually. When you sort of think about it, you think, wow. And once you get into that mindset, that really starts to drive it. Because every window was different. We had 2 carpenters for 6 months just building window formwork. That was their job for 6 months, to stick in the concrete walls, to pour around. So whole lots of challenges like that you just wouldn't get on any other job.
Darrell, I can just about hear some of our listeners virtually running away from this podcast because of the complexity that must be involved when they're going, what? No two windows were the same? How do you order that? How do you build it? It must have presented some really unique challenges for you. You were having to comply with the Hundertwasser Foundation, who oversees, the building and making sure that it's true to design and their code. And then virtually hear our listeners going, man, I struggle to get consents through council when they're for a nice square plumb, everything's the same, it's all done to code, and they've got lots of reference points. Talk to us about what that was like for you, managing the requirements of the foundation, and then also working with council, et cetera, to make sure this was all compliant.
That was a real challenge, right? So, but I think I've got to take my hat off to the foundation and Yoram Harel, who heads it in Vienna. If they didn't doggedly stick to their guns, we wouldn't have the building we have today. So they really protected his IP and that, so that was one thing. So we would at times we were sending photographic and video footage up daily, and they approve it and give us the go ahead to carry on or pull it out and start again. So there was lots of things that had to get past them. They had no skin in the game financially, but sort of form fabric wise, it was all about what they had approved. They had a on-site representative, Richard Smart, absolutely fantastic. Really, really good, really helpful, gave us good guidance. Working with the council, that was absolutely fantastic. Like we said right from the start, we've always had a good relationship with them, with the building team and that. We sort of included them in our wider subcontract team. So all of our comms out to our subcontractors included the council. Like the whole floor's undulating, right? So because the forest floor is not even, why should a building floor be? We deserve that sensation of unevenness. Vienna would send over contour plans on how they want the building to flow when you're walking through it. We'd have to draw them out on the floor, put some height pegs in, get them to approve it, then pour concrete to these sort of different undulations, and then the tilers would come through and tile it. But you can imagine if you've got visually impaired people or blind or people in wheelchairs and you've got this floor that's all over the show, we would get the council inspectors down there, their team, and it's just a matter of having a scrum. Like we're obviously sympathetic to the fact that this thing has to be code compliant, and there are certain levels like crossfalls on footpaths that are allowed that are sloping to a certain amount. And they were sympathetic to the fact that we had this Hundertwasser building to build, and you just keep talking about it and come up with ways to satisfy both, and then we could move on, and then it would be signed off. So we spent a heck of amount of time with them, basically chewing the fat, talking about it. This is what we've got to achieve. At one stage, we were talking to the Hundertwasser, the Vienna guys were saying, look, it's got to be like this. And we're saying, well, we can't do that. We'd send an email back, we can't do that. It's our building code, it's our law. So next day there'd be an email from them, well, just ring your government and change the law. And that's serious. Full on, and that's how dogged they were. But the proof's in the pudding, like the building's absolutely amazing because of it, and you just work through it. Right, sure. We come to an amicable solution that Vienna's happy with. It complies, and it really meets the brief of the project.
Classic components of, I guess, all relationships, but certainly one in such a complex construction environment is keep people included and communicate often. And if you do that, you won't get a perfect outcome every time, but people do come together. They're starting to work. They're looking towards a common goal. If you do that, keep them included and communicate often.
Yeah, and I think the other key point, I suppose, that we talked about within our team is actually be sympathetic to their part of it. So if you pick the council, their role is to ensure that it's safe for the public to navigate around and interact within, and if there's a emergency, safe for them to get out. So we have to put ourselves in their shoes and understand that that they have a role to play, and we want to help them out. And if we butted heads against them, it's just going to go nowhere. So if we listen and understand and hear their point and then work towards getting to that, but also help them understand the project's point, everyone won out of it. And we didn't have any trouble at all. We just all got on and And that was a key point, I think. If you're sympathetic to the other party, you go a lot further and a lot quicker.
Stand in the shoes of the person you're talking to and try and take their perspective. It's great. It's a great perspective to have.
Yeah, well said.
Now, Darrell, you are someone I know to be an exceptionally positive person. We've had many great conversations, and you've always bring positivity and exuberance. There must have been a moment during this project where you were head in hands, shaking your head. Was there a time? And if it was, what was the moment or the situation that caused a bit of head shaking or a bit of head scratching?
I think if you talk to the guys on site, it was just about every day. But I don't know, sometimes it was frustrating. I mean, sometimes the politics of politics can be frustrating. Project itself and the work was definitely challenging, without a doubt. But sometimes the politics can get in the way of a real good project, that stuff was frustrating. But I think within our team, like the guys and the wider team, the subcontractors, everyone bought into it. But there was a really, really good culture on site, and everyone enjoyed what they were doing, albeit hard.
Sure.
And challenging and difficult. I think everyone knew they were doing something that was absolutely special. And one day it was all going to be over and we could all stand back quite proudly and have a look at it. There's nothing that really sort of sticks out as exceptionally, COVID came along. I mean, everyone's had experiences with that, but we just worked through it. The wider construction industry worked hard during that period to get everyone back on deck quickly with good safety protocols and all that. Master builders were instrumental in working with that with some of the other industry players and that, and issued a whole lot of protocols. We implemented them all on site and just got back into gear.
And Darrell, what would be your favourite aspect of the building? And it might be something that you can't even see because it's in behind a facade or it's in the structure. But do you have a favourite element of the building?
When we set out on this project, there was a study group that shot over to Vienna, and that was absolutely critical to understanding what we were trying to achieve. What I took away from that is what we were trying to build was an experience. I can quite honestly say you'll go there 1, 2, 10, 50, 100 times, and you will always see something that you haven't seen previously. What I'm mostly proud of, I think, apart from all the people that were involved in that, is just the smaller details. Like I could say, if you walk around that building, just at ground level, you'll find a kiwi, a waka, a whale, a kauri tree, a snow angel, a scaffolder's wrench. Some of them are obvious, a lot of them aren't. It'll take you ages to find them. To this extent that the day we pulled the fence down, when we were all finished early last year, I found a snow angel on one corner of the building that I'd never seen before, and I'd be going there every week. The balustrades, like everything just challenges your thinking. Because if you go back to that comment I made that when you're in a space, you can't look around and see the same thing twice. So all of them are bent slightly differently or welded slightly differently. None of them are the same. So each little bit of 12 millimetre by 12 millimetre steel, vertical, is different to the whole rest of them, but they still have to comply with the code and have no more than a 100 mil gap between them. It's real smart, very smart. There's lots of things like that just you walk around and you're just like, wow, look at that, wow, look at that, wow, look at that. Just some of the skills that the guys have got, the spiral stairs, but boxing and pouring a round spiral staircase over 2 to 3 levels. It's just something that no one will ever do again because it's just way too expensive. But on this building, it was the only way you could do it.
And Darrell, you mentioned earlier that it was a polarising project for the community, not only design-wise, but the amount of money that was being committed to it, etc. Have you had an experience of someone that was vocally opposed to it pre-building, and now that they've seen it and they've seen it constructed and they've seen what it's done for the community, they've changed their view?
Yeah, look, without a doubt, several times. A favourite thing of mine to do is just to go and sort of loiter with intent around that on a weekend and just sit down, or we go, down there, and people just ask you what it is if they're out of town, and I don't tell them who we are and what we had to do with it. You just talk to them about it. Beforehand, a lady stopped me in the street and said, I knew her, and she said, with all due respect to you and your team, I hate that building. I said, that's fantastic. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, it's art. If everyone loved it, we wouldn't be doing our job. But what actually happened was I started explaining to her about Hundertwasser's philosophy about nature and why the building's like it is. And she said, it makes a lot more sense now. People sort of took a bit of time to understand why it's like it is. Then you could appreciate why it's like it is. Because I think people just, because it's different, it's not mainstream. And that's just talks to how channeled our thinking's been generationally to accept stuff. You'd appreciate it more. And we've had this. We had friends recently, and Marlene was talking to some people outside, and they said the same thing. They said, this is hideous. And she started talking to them about why, and they began to love it. Oh, and also once they understand that the ratepayers haven't paid for it, they all love it as well.
Indeed. Oh, that's brilliant. There's such good insights there, Darrell. It's been truly an epic build for you. Is it a legacy for Trigg? Is it a legacy for you? Do you feel like it's a legacy for the community? What's your opinion?
Well, I think what we're most proud of, like definitely for our team to be able to produce this, is definitely, an amazing milestone. It's a career high for us. And I think, as I said, what we're most proud of is that it was 95% Northland companies. And I'm not knocking companies from out of town. I think it's just that there's an amazing set of skills in Northland and lots of other provincial New Zealand, right, that we're incredibly proud of that. I think it's a game changer for Whangarei and for Northland. Whangarei's never, ever been on the radar for the cruise ship industry, and it is definitely now firmly in their sights. Pre-COVID lockdown 4 in 2020, there was 14 cruise ships confirmed to stop to come and have a look at this.
Right.
And they go straight from Paihia to Auckland otherwise. So it's a game changer in many ways. For our team, obviously, if you take the project as a whole, there's never going to be another one like it. There may be, who knows? The one in Kawakawa that they did was just equally as amazing. The new centre up there, and so there may be other ones, but I don't think to this extent. This is a big project. But if you think about, if you think what's next, we've just gone on to a big bulk store down by the port, which is a big old square building. And I think it was a little bit refreshing for the guys, but they're ready for another challenge because, we had apprentices fitting natural timber carry doors in a curved wall. And you just don't do that every day. So, but I just sort of think if you break it down into those wee components, from a legacy perspective, we've got 900 people that have got skills that they're never going to get the chance to get anywhere else in their career. But what it does is it sets you up with that thinking to just think outside the square, pardon the pun, but just think outside of the norm to start problem solving. And I think that's a really, really good skill to have.
Brilliant, Darrell. And when you're, sitting on that bench outside the Hundertwasser and reflecting on what you've been involved with there, if you were to describe one emotion that it makes you feel, what would it be?
Just amazement, like wonderment. Like I always think it's just about like that Disneyland fever, where you go in there and you're just looking around at everything going, wow, look at that. Wow, look at that. There's so many facets to it that challenge what you do, and you don't have to be a builder. Like I'm constantly getting texts from people and messages from people saying, we've been there for the weekend with our kids and it was absolutely incredible. And it's that type of building because the building is an experience. The Wairau Māori Art Centre and the Contemporary Māori Art Collection, I think it's the largest collection of contemporary Māori art in the Southern Hemisphere. So the within the building, and it's got Hundertwasser's only artworks outside of Vienna in the world globally. So you think of the Louvre, you think of all these, and this is in Whangarei. Right, so if you just park the building for a minute, the contents of the building and the art is just outstanding on its own, But then when you put in the fact that there's over 3,000 plants and 150 trees on the roof of this building that you can get to walk through as a garden, it's a whole other kettle of fish, absolutely amazing. And that really is truly, I think, just the wonderment of the experience.
So maybe we've got some listeners and they've got a couple of apprentices complaining on site about it's a bit tough. Maybe they should take their team up to the Hundertwasser and go, hey, you reckon what we're building's tough? We'll imagine what it was like building this one.
Absolutely. I mean, just on so many levels, if you just think about the tiling, the tiling, from what I understand, tiling's around about an hour a square metre. This was 6 to 7 hours a square metre, so everything was just exponentially tougher or trickier, it just took us so much longer, so in a day, you've just sort of got through a bit over a square metre of tiling.
And when you're trying to apply those tiles to a curved wall and none of your tiles can be the same size or shape, you can see how that gets tricky and demanding, but then the resulting effect from what's created, right, is very special.
Yeah. But the wall's not only curved when you look down on it, it's also undulating when you rub your hand up over it. So every surface, there's no flat surfaces either. So nothing's, it just challenges everything that you're like, wow, how did they, geez, look at that. So, yeah, it's a really, really cool thing to go and have a look at. Obviously, with every building, the finish belies the work that hides behind it. But, but that's just part of it. But I think you can't paint a painting without the underlying canvas revealing itself. And that's sort of what, Vienna had to sign off the structure before we started applying the art, I suppose, before we started plastering, tiling and all the finishes and all that. We had to do some test areas that they had to approve, but they had to do a walkthrough of the structure, which was done by video because of COVID. They were going to come over and physically walk it and sign it off. But that whole structure had to be signed off before we could start the next stage, that level of detail. So, yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, look, Darrell, congratulations to you and your team. I know you're not someone who seeks to do these things for recognition or award, although it is worth noting that you have won a couple of awards around this project. Do you want to? Yes. Can you brag for a moment? I know it's not your thing, but go on, brag for a couple.
I think the New Zealand Commercial Project Awards is one that we really wanted to enter because it celebrates the effort of the team. Any project or any business doesn't run without people. So we entered with the architects, the client project managers, our team, like the whole mob of us. And we went down, we took our wider team down. So there was, I think, 16 of us went down to Christchurch for the evening. And we were really fortunate to be awarded a gold award, which says that you scored over 90% of the 2,000 points, which is really, really hard to get. And we were also awarded the special award, which is something, from what I understand, that it's an award that the judges give for something that's just next level, that they can't really put their finger on it. I suppose it doesn't fit into any other category, which is certainly this building. I mean, you can't just put it into a shoebox and say, well, we can give it one of those, So it was amazing. We're really privileged to be part of it. We're really thankful to the judges in the competition for coming and having a look at it and experiencing it, and them seeing their way clear to award it. So it's a great pat on the back for the wider team.
And Darrell, I feel like you've just exhibited the values of leadership that you exhibit so well. I asked you to brag for a moment, and you immediately talked about the team, and you even thanked the judges. So I think that's a great exhibition of your leadership style and why you've been able to bring a team together to deliver such a complex project with that kind of approach to leadership. So, Darrell, thank you so much for sharing your insights around this project. Absolutely fascinating. Would absolutely encourage everyone from around the country and globally to come visit this, because people literally are coming from around the globe to see it. We have this treasure in our own country. Get there, visit it. We'll put some links in the podcast show notes so people can easily access details about how to get there and what they're in for. But any closing words from you, Darrell?
Oh, look, just go and enjoy the experience. I mean, one thing that took me a long time to find was there's a little bird's nest that guys have made out of clay tiles sitting on a windowsill with some marble eggs in it that's going to be there forever. Go and find it.
Okay, and is there a prize when we find it and give you a call and go, hey, we found it?
Yeah, give me a ring.
Okay, we'll do that. Hey, thanks, Darrell. Appreciate you.
All good, mate. Thanks a lot.